グローバルチェーン、ブロックチェーングローバルガバナンスカンファレンス、フィンサムブロックチェーン
Blockchain Global Governance Conference, FinSam Blockchain and Business. Thank you very much for joining us for this program out of your busy schedules. It is now time. We would like to start the session titled Balancing Confidentiality and Auditability. This is going to be a panel discussion session. I would like to introduce the panelists. Professor of the University of Tokyo, Professor Kanta Matsuura, is joining us online. From Mitsubishi Research Institute, Senior Researcher, Mr. Yuji Kawada. Thank you for joining us. From the Bank of Japan, Payment and Settlement Systems Department, Mr. Masashi Hojo. Thank you. And the moderator of this session will be also from the Bank of Japan, Payment and Settlement Systems Department, Director, Mr. Takeshi Yamada. Without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Yamada to moderate the session. Mr. Yamada, the floor is yours. Hello. I will be serving as the moderator of this session. I'm Director of Payment and Settlement Systems Department of the BOJ. The title of this session is Balancing Confidentiality and Auditability. Some of the awareness of the issues, as well as how we would like to organize this session, I would like to cover that first. Now, confidentiality and auditability, balancing the two. In DLT, by making use of DLT, some kind of payment systems, payment infrastructure to be built, to be run, and the transactions and the participants, as well as the content of these transactions, such information, people other than the participants, to what extent can you keep that confidential? How should it be kept confidential? And how many people should be able to access that information? What is the threshold of that access? For example, ID of the participants or the content of such transactions. How can you enhance such confidentiality? There has been progress in technical development. So we would like to be discussing that. And on top of that, when you are to operate and build a payment system, a third party must have access to that transaction information. Sometimes that will be required. That is what we mean by auditability. On these topics, in February of this year, together with ECB, we're working on a project Stella, on distributed ledger system, and we have issued a report. So at the top of this program, Phase 4 report will be covered in the explanation. And after that, we will have a discussion, including panelists, on these topics. As for the panelists, as were discussed earlier, we have Professor of the University of Tokyo, Professor Matsuura, and from Mitsubishi Research Institute, Mr. Kawada. And next to me is Mr. Hojo from the BOJ, Payment and Settlement Systems Department. These will be the panelists. Now, at the outset, the latest report of Project Stella on balancing confidentiality and auditability, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Hojo. So I would like to give an outline of Project Stella and also talk about the latest report, balancing confidentiality and auditability of transaction information in DLT environment. About this Project Stella, as we heard from Mr. Yamada just now, the BOJ and the ECB are conducting this joint research. And in this project, DLT, distributed ledger technology, whether it can be applied to financial market infrastructure. For example, in Japan, it will be Zengin system and BOJ net. These are payment settlement or settlement infrastructure for securities. So for such financial market infrastructure, whether DLT can be applied This is a project to explore that possibility. In 2016, this project was started, and it has progressed to phase 4 thus far. In phases 1 and 2, Mr. Kawada here was very much involved in phases 1 and 2. In payment infrastructure, if DLT was to be applied, what are the challenges? What are the possible superiority in using such technology were explored? And the latest phase is phase 4. Confidentiality and auditability are the focus in the latest phase of the project. So I would like to talk about some of the issues handled in phase 4. Now, they're making use of DLT, and when you handle transaction information, you need to secure confidentiality. This is one challenge. What this is about is that if you are using DLT, participants will be running DLT nodes to build a network. And on top of that, transaction information will be shared. When that happens between participants, if there is to be remittance from sender to receiver, this transaction information will be handed over. And a third party would also be able to see that information because that will be shared. So this is visible to a third party, whether that is okay or not. So this is the issue of confidentiality. So that is issue number 1. How can you secure confidentiality of transaction information on a DLT environment? A related issue at the bottom, a responsible third party securing governance is the second issue being handled. As I said, there is a need to keep confidentiality of transaction information. Let's say that there is a transaction that has been kept confidential. There should be a third-party auditor, for example, system operator or the regulator. Such third parties should be able to access that transaction information, but sometimes that may not be possible because of this confidentiality. So in orange, in order to audit transactions which have been kept confidential, what are the processes that should be placed and put into place for that auditability? There is a trade-off relationship between the two, confidentiality at the top and auditability at the bottom. How do you balance the two? Reconcile the two. That's the main theme of phase 4. In phase 4, what we were thinking of is based on DLT. If FMI is to be built on DLT, we have assumed such a situation. We thought of a virtual model. Financial institutions using DLT nodes to create a network and using digital assets to make payments and settlements. Such a tentative FMI was assumed. This is a permissioned type network that is being assumed. We're not assuming any participant to be able to participate in transactions. It's only permissioned people who can become participants to the network. And financial institutions will be the participants, but on top of that, there will be third parties who are to audit transaction information. So that is what we have assumed in this case. So based on this model, what kind of transaction information are we going to consider? We are thinking of something very simple this time. If you look at the bottom diagram in the ledger, there is transaction information in this box. There's sender A and receiver B. So small a to small b, there's the sending of this amount. And how much is the amount? It's 100 euro in this diagram. So these 3 pieces of information will be described in this transaction information. Whether this could be hidden or whether an auditor will be able to see this information. Now, when you think about an FMI based on DLT, traditional centralized FMI, when you make a comparison, we will be able to see the significance of the challenges. On the right-hand side, we have centralized system. BOJ Net is one of them. There is a centralized operator administering the system. And there are 4 features that are being controlled by a centralized operator.
And on the left, when we think about the FMI based on the DLT, then the bottom 2, they're managing confidentiality and also to enable check-in of the transaction information. These are the things that need to be considered in addition. Now, against these issues, what did we do as part of phase 4? And allow me to explain this briefly. The first is the result of the study. The privacy enhancing technology on the DLT. So we have studied that and we have tried to look into that structure. And the second point is about auditability. And on a DLT with the PET introduced, in order to check the transaction, what needs to be done, what are the perspectives that need to be taken into consideration, and these are the things that's being considered. So let me share with you the result from the first part. The privacy enhancement technology on the DLT, there are many of these available, and we have picked up some of the typical ones, and we try to investigate and to catalogise that, and we talk about the properties within the report. Say, for example, the second dot, the square, and so we have things like the PAT technology platform, which are the Corda or Hyper Ledger Fabric that enables control of who the information on the ledger is shared. Or we have the zero knowledge proofing that enables information to be made confidential through the encryption technology. Or we have something like mixing, which makes it difficult to determine who are the transaction parties. So we try to describe technology using these examples. Now, these technologies can be categorized into 3 types based on their technological perspective. So we feel that these PET can be organized from a structural perspective. Now, regarding these 3 types, well, I said that there are 3 different types, and I'm not going to explain in detail here, but if you are interested, please read our report. And we have the segregating the PET, and we have the hiding PET and unlinking PET. So these are the 3 the technological properties that may be utilized for the privacy enhancing technology. And the second result of the research and verification, if a PET is introduced into DLT, and on such an environment, how can we check the transaction? This is what we have looked into. And if you use PET, the transaction information is made confidential, but auditor needs to be able to look at that information to judge as to whether the transaction is correct or not. For that, we need to take 3 perspectives into consideration. And in phase 4, we have proposed that the transaction checking process need to be designed. And 3 perspectives is shown on the illustration on the bottom. So first is the accessibility to the necessary information. Say, for example, there are the encrypted information on the ledger, and you need the key to be able to look at that. But the auditor can access such a key? So that's the first point. And on the bottom right is the reliability of obtained information. So here, for example, using the key, and when the transaction information is decoded, then to be able to ascertain as to whether the transaction is really correct or not. And the third is looking at the transaction confirmation process itself. Is it being done efficiently? So theoretically, one may be able to do this if we want to spend 100 years, but that is inefficient. So we need to look into the efficiency aspect as well. So the thing is that we wanted to address these 3 aspects. That is what is reported. Now, in this page, and we have the research into the privacy and safety technology, and we also looked into the viability of transaction taking processes. We're looking at the relation between the two. It's difficult to explain here, but various types of PET are shown on the top left, top right, and bottom. And there, within this paper, there are a number of technologies that we have studied, and they're actually mapped in this graph. And towards the center, the transaction auditing process can be done quite effectively, the more center you go. And if we look at this, there are a number of technologies by what is introduced as to whether the transaction auditing process can be realized or not will end up being different. So, in order to audit a transaction, we need to take into consideration the three aspects, and upon that, we need to select the right technology. So that's the kind of conclusion that we have reached at. So that was quite brief, but as a summary of phase 4, the result of the research or result of the verification 1 and 2 is shown in the top part. But I'd like for you to look at the bottom part of the page, which leads to the panel discussion. Now, in the report, we have considered a simple model, but if we were to examine this for actual application, there are additional methods that needs to be taken into consideration, and these are listed on this page. In fact, there are 4 listed on the page. First is the trustworthy central source. If we have such a source, in order to secure confidentiality, then if there is a confidentiality enabling technology at the center, then the auditor can just make inquiry there, then identify confidential information. But if we were to do that, it makes it easy, but that would also lead to single point of failure risk. So that's one challenge. And the second is that if we introduce several PET, we can enhance confidentiality by combining these multiple PET. But if we were to do that, the transaction checking process will become even more complicated. And the third is that if we have an environment where we have multiple settlement systems, and if there are interlinked, but if in a certain settled system, what are the requirements for the confidentiality and auditability? But if we go to the other settlement system, this could be different. So how can we actually balance the two? And that would require quite complex the design. So that's just the challenge or the issue raised here. The last is handling transaction of the end users. What we're thinking of in this model is that financial institution becomes the participants. So essentially, we have focused on the wholesale of the settlement. But if we expand this to the settlement and payments of the end users, then the information included in the transaction information becomes more complicated. From the privacy perspective, to what extent can we hide? To what extent can we make visible? And this will become quite complex. So if we were to handle something like this, we need to give even more consideration. So that was quite brief, but this is the latest phase details of Project Stella. So if you are interested, the report is made public. So please access our website and have a look. So that was quite brief, but that was the introduction of the Project Stella. Thank you very much. On the distributed ledger, the confidentiality and auditability of transaction information. There was an explanation about the two. So we'd like to now have some discussions amongst the panelists. To begin with, if I could ask the panelists to introduce yourselves, and though we're talking about quite a broad theme, the confidentiality and auditability, and if we were to use a DET, then what would be the value brought about by a DLT? And if I could ask you to share your thoughts on this. To begin with, if I could ask Professor Matsuura joining online. Hello, my name is Matsuura, Kanta Matsuura, professor from the Tokyo University. And let me do a brief self-introduction. In my research unit, we only study information security, but if it is information security, we cover everything. Of course, DLT becomes an important theme of our research. When we research everything, what becomes evident is that, like with the encryption technology or cryptographic technology, we start to address some non-technological themes as well. And the information security economics, we have started to address it for others. In fact, we've started this before 2000. In fact, in 2001, started to talk about security token and derivatives. And the basic theory that is discussed at the conference today is actually used as a text.
So we heard from Mr. Hojo, privacy enhancing technologies. In that area, Japanese literature, its share is only less than 1%, but we have issued papers including location privacy information and cryptography. Important things are made possible through DLT. There were so many keywords in Mr. Hojo's slide. I was impressed that there was a lot of research work done. So put together, information security, economics, and cryptography, there's a lot of attention paid to DLT. Academia focusing on this matter means that on this particular topic, objective and systematic approach is being taken. If there's a lot of interest, there is potential for growth. So I think that is one of the values of DLT. Specifically, we hope to have a developed conversation today later. Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to ask Mr. Kawada to talk about your view on the value of DLT. My name is Kawada. I'm from Mitsubishi Research Institute. As we heard earlier, I was seconded to the BOJ for some time. And in yesterday's CBDC session, Mr. Kobayakawa, who was a moderator, Advisor Kobayakawa, back then, in phase 1 and phase 2 of Project Stella, I was involved in. Now I'm back from the BOJ secondment, and this afternoon there is going to be a session hosted by the FSA, government agencies, or private sector companies. When they work on blockchain, we are providing assistance in research. Mr. Yamada, Mr. Hojo, BOJ, and Professor Matsuura, they are supporting me as always. I was looking forward to conversation today. Now, the value of DLT, the attractiveness and appeal of DLT, personally speaking, is transparency and verifiability. Nobody can monopolize data. It's not a black box. That is the biggest value, the most notable feature. Now, transparency and verifiability leads to trust in the system. When you think about crypto assets, market value currently is about slightly less than 40 trillion yen. Transaction value per day is shortly less than 10 trillion per day. So this is because of trust in transparency and verifiability. But DLT, whether it has transformed the financial system thus far, personally speaking, I don't think we have gotten to that level yet. Be it Stella, or MAS, Singapore, and Bank of Canada, project called Jasper. Existing financial infrastructure is now being reviewed as triggered by DLT. DeFi, distributed finance, financial services are being looked at as triggered by DLT, but that is so far we have gotten. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Kawada. Next, I'd like to ask Mr. Hojo to give us a comment on the value of
私の
DLT.
方からは、DLT の本質的な価値についてちょっと日頃から考え
I'd
てい
like
る
to
とお話ししたいんですけれども、
My thoughts on the essential value of
一
DLT.
番初めに出てきたのはビットコインと捉えるのが良いのかなと思うんです
DLT
けれ
came
ど
about
も、そこで
with
実現され
Bitcoin
た
initially.
新しいものは何かという
What
と、
was realized
特定の
then?
信
What
頼
is
権
novel about
みたい
it?
なものを置かずに、
A
情報
certain
の正し
trust
さが
point does not
証明でき
exist,
る、正しい情報を
but
記録できる
correctness of information can be
ことが
proved.
DLT によって初めてで
Correct
きるようになった
information
んじゃないか
can
なと
be
思
recorded.
ってお
That
り
was
ま
made
す。
possible
こ
for
れ
the
先
first
ほど
time
私からご
through
説明させてい
DLT.
ただいたFMI のモデルを考えるときに
I talked
DLT を
about
用いてい
the
くと、
FMI
中央
model.
の運営者と
When
い
you
う
use
のはなく、
DLT, you
参加
don't
者が
need
ネ
a
ットワークを
centralized
共同で利用し
operator.
ていくみたいなことがあって、これは特定の
Participants
信
will be
頼権
jointly
が置かれ
running
な
the
いような
network.
設計に
There
なる
is
の
no
かな
single
と
point of
思うんですけれ
trust
ども、
in
こういった
design.
誰かがガバナンスをしっかり聞かせることなく、ただしルールに従って
With no
参加者の
central
間で
party
正しい情報が記録できること
exercising
が
governance, but
DLT の
with
価値なのか
between
なと思うんです
participants,
けれども、
accurate
でも注意
information
点
can
があ
be
っ
shared.
て、
That's the value of DLT.
信
But
頼
there
権
is a
をな
caveat.
くして、でも情報の正しさを記
Without
録
a
したい
trust
という
point,
この難しい問いに答え
but
るためにかなり
correctness of
コストを
information
か
must
けて
be
いるビジネスだ
recorded.
と
This is a
思っており
challenge.
ます。
So this is a
パブリ
technology
ッ
which
ク
is
ブロックチェーンみたい
costly.
なものを考えてみますと、
When you think
台
about a
帳
public
の
blockchain,
数十ギガバイト、数百とかもうテラいくのか分かんないですけれども、そういった情報を参加者
several
が
hundred
分散してい
gigabytes
ろ
or
んなところで持っているとすごく
terabytes.
コストがかかっているはずですし、さら
Participants
に
storing
情
that
報の正
information
し
in
さっていう
distributed
ものをみんな
places
が
is
検証
costly,
してさらに覆せ
and the
ないように
correctness
計算
of
をしていくことに
information
も
must
コ
be
ストがかかって
verified
いますと。
and conducting
でそういう
computation
ことを
so
考
that
え
it will not
て
be
いきますと、
reversed.
分散
That
が
is also
途絶え
very
てきたブロ
costly.
ックチェーンっていう
So
言
when
葉
you
は
think
実
about
は
this,
目的ではなくて手段のと
DLT
ころに
and
着目したネ
blockchain
ーミン
is
グになっ
not
て
a
いるということは
purpose.
注意が
This
必要
is
なん
a
じゃないかなと
name
もちょっと思ってお
that
り
is
まして、
looking
つまり
at the means rather than
台
the
帳
purpose.
の正しい情報を
The
台帳に
end.
記録するために
Correct
台帳を分
information
散して
to be
持っている
recorded
んで
on the
すし、
ledger. That is
その
why
台帳
the
が
ledger is
正しく
distributed.
つながれていく、
And
そこに
if
競
the
争が生まれ
ledger
て、
is connected
確実な
correctly, and if there's
台帳情報
competition,
として記録されてい
you
くの
can
に
have
ブロックにして
certain
それをつなげていくつなぐブロック
information. That is
と
why
いう
it
こ
is
ともありますので、
stored in the form of
本質
blocks,
的な
and
価値
blocks
は
are
私
being
の中では
connected.
情報
So
の
the
正しさを記
essential
録することだ
value
と思うんですけれども、
is
そ
to
の正しい
record
情報を
correct
記録する装
information.
置とは呼ばずに、ブロックチェー
So
ン
this is a
DLT というと
mechanism
ころ
to
には
store
本質的な
correct
価値を
information,
若
but the
干惑
name
わせる
is
ような
DLT and
ネー
blockchain.
ミングもあるかと思いますので、そこには気をつけ
And
て、
the name
この後のディスカッションの中でもその
sometimes
本質的
confuses
価値を捉
in
えて、
understanding
どこで活用していける
purpose
か
of
という
this.
ことを
So you
議論
need to
していきたい
understand the
と思ってお
essential
ります。
value of this
よろしくお願いし
technology
ます。
in thinking about how it can be used and applied.
それでは私から
Thank
2つ目
you.
のディスカッションのトピックとしまして、今ご意見
I would like to raise the second discussion topic.
それを生かして
You
いく
talked
上
about
で
the value of DLT in making use of it.
これがどういうふうに
Confidentiality and auditability, these perspectives, how they interact. If you could give us your comment, Mr. Hojo, you said that DLT does not have a point of trust, but you can be certain of the accuracy of information, and it is costly. So based on that, how are we going to use confidentiality and
続
auditability?
けてなりますけれども、
Let me
今申
continue.
し上げてました通り、DLT を使っていき
As I
ます
said
と、
just
情
now,
報を参加
when
者
you
間で
use
共有していく
DLT
といったところ
between
が
participants,
必要になっている
information will be
必要といいますか
shared.
特徴になってきますけれども、まさに
That
そ
is
れ
the
が
notable feature about
フェーズ4の中でも
DLT.
捉えています通り、不特定の観
phase
点から
4,
課題になってくる
From
と
the
いうところが
perspective of confidentiality, there are
わけで
issues.
すけれども、でこういった秘匿性の課題というのは、フェーズ4
Now,
の中でも取り上
confidentiality
げた様々
issues
なこう
in phase 4,
ネットワーク
there
上
are
の制御技術であったり
various
暗号の技術を
control
使っていくことによって高め
technologies
ることは
and
で
encryption
きるかなとは
technologies
思うん
that
で
could
す
be
けれども、
used to enhance
逆にこう情報
confidentiality,
の正
but
しさっていうものの捉
conversely,
え方が
correctness of
だんだん複雑に
information,
な
how
って
it
くるん
is
じゃないかなと
captured,
思っています。
will be
例
made
えば
more
ビットコイン
complex.
ネット
For
ワークの
example,
上の台帳に書かれているトラ
on
ンザ
top
クショ
of
ンの情報っていうのは誰
Bitcoin
でも見ることが
network,
できて、
transaction
確かに
information on top of that
ど
can
の
be viewed
ID
by
からどの
anyone.
ID に送金が行われて
From
いたかって
which
いうのは誰で
ID
も
to
確認で
which
きるわけですけ
ID
れども、
money was
仮に
sent
暗
can
号
be
が
checked
技
by
術を使っ
anyone.
て台帳の上に書
But
かれ
if
ているのは謎
encryption
の文字列
technology
だ
is
け
to
れ
be
ども、
used,
仮
and
に
what is written
だと
on
した
the the ledger is a mysterious series of numbers, but a proper person would be able to tell what that information is. So the accuracy of information cannot be audited by everyone, checked by everyone. So when you think about confidential DLT to be applied in real world, it's not just a matter of technology. You need to think about business rules, systems, and laws. Those considerations will have to take place. Encrypted information and that accuracy, how could it be handled? Theoretically, it is correct. But what about legal aspects? How can you think about the accuracy of that from the legal standpoint? Those will be the challenges. DLT technology, encryption technology, it's not just a matter that is limited to those technologies. We are seeing this accelerated trend of digital transformation. When businesses go digital, when livelihoods go digital, systems and laws must be changed and updated to accommodate these developments. That is what we have looked at in this phase 4 of Project Stella.
So we need to have the laws and the rules to match the situation. So Kata-san, now the value of DLT, you said that transparency and auditability are important, and based on this, we need to have the trust differently from the past. So on that basis, from the perspective of confidentiality and auditability, if I could have your comment. And what I said before, the value of DLT, the transparency, and this is essentially auditability as I described here, I think. And as I explained before, transparency and auditability is one thought, and confidentiality or privacy. These the concept are quite the opposite. But to balance the two or to achieve both, then there are various entities, and depending on the entity, the system to secure the appropriate the transparency is essentially the access control. And when we think about phase 4, in phase 4, and there are 3 axes being proposed in terms of auditability, and these are the accessibility, reliability, and efficiency. And the other 2, the confidentiality and the privacy or access control, I think they can be looked at under the same axis. Now, in terms of the confidentiality or privacy, is data sent? How can we secure that? Is the entire information being sent? How can we secure that? So it's essentially checking those aspects. In terms of crypto, the asset, there are various types of the cryptographic technology and mixing as a channel one coin or coin shuffle. And there's a crypto node for the anonymous other currency. But has that been really verified or been checked? Maybe not at that stage right now. In that respect, with regards to the confidentiality, we need to look at this. But in terms of access control, it's essentially the accreditation approval. And accreditation is the person A. Is the person A really person A to check that on a cyberspace? And that group, if we know that it is a person A, then to apply the authority for the person A. So there, we need to also look at the situation from the 3 perspectives of accessibility to reliability and efficiency. And like Kojo-san said before, to correct or to record the accurateness of the information. Now, if we look at the public type, it will end up forking, so finality becomes difficult. And the finality is not certain. And there are a lot of discussion in this area and economic finality. So if there is no profit thereon, it's considered final at that point in time. But the finality discussion is the reliability information on the blockchain. So it's quite an important aspect, and this does have the influence on the confidentiality and auditability as well. And if we look at things outside technology, there are various perspectives. Confidentiality, many people want to actually hide, don't want to make it available for others to see. There are always invoice incentives like that. And for the information that are necessary, then how can we actually control the incentive? So there is an incentive the related discussion and talked about the accreditation and the authorization. But to what extent can one look at it? And there is the governance perspective to determine the rules associated. And when it becomes to the implementation, there are various details. There is a confidentiality technology or the auditability technology. Do they really be viable? And the bug in terms of the operation, how can we actually remove that? That's quite difficult. OpenSSH and OpenSSL in 2016, there was a serious bugs that was identified. And in 2018, in Bitcoin, found the biggest fragility or the vulnerability in history, and will become kind of a significant issue. And so these type of vulnerabilities continue to come up. So how can we remove those? How can we create trust? Is also quite an important point. Thank you. So we need to check and validate the various technologies. I think that was essentially the comment made. Next, Professor Matsuura, if I could ask you to talk about the interest towards the technology from the academia. There is a possibility of this technology making advances. But if I could ask you to make comment from the perspective of confidentiality and auditability, like Kawada-san said, we need to validate technologically. This is the precondition to my comment. And the application of DLT, there could be various areas other than fintech. And in some of these, there are very complex requirements for privacy. And various type of demonstration experiment is being done. And one of the reasons why is that information confidentiality and also the auditability, there are still challenges associated with these. But if we use technology well, then we are able to actually organize this legally quite in detail. So we need to do the research, do the appropriate assessment. That will be the condition. But under such condition, and if we compare to those era where DLT did not exist, we can now achieve more efficient control, and as a result, the impact towards the society. And one of the impact of the society, something that I have great expectation upon, is kind of as an implementation tool. We are experiencing the COVID impact right now, and there is the go-to campaign. But if there were a campaign like that being run, and around June, there was a campaign to promote cashless payment. And the people who were involved in the implementation of these campaigns had to struggle through. But we are able to remove these the difficulties and to implement these campaigns more efficiently. Now, this is possible because DLT has essentially has the point scheme for the cryptocurrency and so you can actually naturally embed the payment scheme like that. And upon that, we are able to add on a programmable services. And if this is to be implemented, then rapidly or frequently, even if there are measures that requires frequent changes, at least from the technological perspective, it is doable. And I think that is quite impactful. And the fact that you can apply it in that way, then in terms of the system design at the initial point, this needs to be taken into consideration. So there, information security and economics will have a role to play. And I have quite a significant expectation in that respect. That is all for my comment. Thank you. Well, we're starting to run out of time. So the last question. In phase 4 of Project Stella, we have identified a number of additional challenges. When multiple systems are interlinked, how can we achieve confidentiality and auditability? And to control access to the information, then there could be issues with regards to DLT. So if I could ask comments, so if I could ask Hojo-san to start, who was involved in the Stella report. And in phase 4 of Stella, what we thought about, and we started with a model that was quite simple, and we thought about using DLT for that. And from there, we have identified a number of additional challenges. But when we are to use this, what we need to think about is that confidentiality and auditability, these are essentially the requirements. And they tend to change depending on the type of information handled. And on the DLT, the point of trust is not established, so not one having responsibility for administration, but no one wants to take responsibility, but information is shared by everyone there, and we can use DLT. But for those where it is better to have someone take responsibility to control or manage, then we may be able to manage that centrally without using DLT. It may be more efficient to do so. So that type of information requirement to be ascertained to identify technology which is most appropriate for those uses. And I think that is quite important from practical perspective. So in terms of Project Stella and utilization or DLT for wholesale settlement, and the DLT and for changing the money for the actual settlement of numbers, but not there, but in the peripheral, like KYC or handling peripheral information, it may be able to be utilized in that area as well, so we can broaden the perspective to that extent.
Areas where DLT is likely to be more efficient or something else other than DLT would enhance reliability. That is my view as a result of me having been involved in phase 4. Next, going to Professor Matsuura. Please be brief. In this area, central authority, centralized system, whether it's centralization or decentralization, it's not one or the other. You can have multiple entities, trusted entities, and in cryptography, strictly assess the reliability of such entities. So R&D investment must be made. I think there is a value in investing in such research. And as part of that, these additional challenges may be resolved. Lastly, Mr. Kawada, please. Practical application. It has to first be identified what are the benefits in businesses. So you have to draw the big picture. And as you mentioned in phase 4, multiple systems linking together. And as a whole, how anonymity and confidentiality and auditability can be balanced. That's going to be the point. So in the end, how do you make the rules? How do you decide on data specification standards? These are matters of governance. How much do you invest in compliance-related matters? I think this leads to the discussion of incentives. This is not just for DLT. In cybersecurity, similar challenges are seen. Non-profit generating things. How do you go about making investments in such areas? Conclusion is that not just looking at DLT and payment infrastructure, as Mr. Matsuura said, cybersecurity economics. Other areas, knowledge and expertise may be utilized and harnessed. That could become important. Thank you. I think it is time to close this session. In this session, we heard the phase 4 of Project Stella, as well as the value of DLT utilization as a policy tool, and in the need to determine the benefit of DLT, the importance of academic research, transparency to be secured, which is a notable feature of DLT. So in the payment ecosystem, how can these be
今日はどうもありがとうございました。
optimized. These will be important considerations, and with this we would like to close this session. Thank you very much, Professor Matsuura, Mr. Kawada, Mr. Hojo, and Mr. Yamada. Thank you very much. With this, we would like to bring to a close this panel discussion session on balancing confidentiality and auditability. Next session will start from 20 minutes past 11. In Hall A, there's going to be a demo stage by various businesses. In Hall B, we will have a panel discussion on blockchain and identity. People who are joining us online, please select the URL of your choice. So please wait a few more moments until we start the next session. Thank you.